All right, everyone. Everyone can hear me? We're all good. Give me a thumbs up. Good. Welcome to Spring 2022 Recording Studio Fundamentals. Just a couple of things. My camera is here, and my second computer screen with you guys is over there. Over there. So if I'm looking this way, I'm looking at your pictures on my Zoom screen. All right, and my regular computer screen is right in front of me. So just let you know that up front. If I'm turn my head, it's not like I'm dissing you. I just want to see your lovely faces on the TV screen there. I make a high quality screencast of every class. I'm recording it now. I've got on my computer, not the Zoom video. It says that it's recording the Zoom video. That's a backup in case something screws up here. And I sent you guys the link with a playlist. There will be every class, unless I do something that I think will get blocked by YouTube. Every class will be up on that playlist. It'll be listed class one, the date, and everything. And you should be able to review. And it will sound better than the Zoom sound, and it'll look better probably as well. So that there's that, and a lot of people have found it very helpful to have the review videos. And I'll get around to putting chapters. I usually upload it within a couple of days after class, and then maybe a day or two later I can get around to making chapters, and then you can quickly navigate to the things you want to review. So that should be helpful. The other thing is that, no, there are a few other things. But the big thing is that I've been using Google Classroom for the past several semesters to organize and keep the class all appraised of everything that is coming up. But the college has done away with Google Classroom, and they sent us out some Microsoft thing, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet. So as far as assignments go, for the first assignment, which will be due next Wednesday, I will send you a link for a folder online, either on Dropbox or on my Google Drive, that you will put your assignment in. And then hopefully over the next week, I can organize and figure out this Microsoft, I forget, Teams, I think it's called. And then I can get that set up and make it as efficient as Google Class is and invite you guys to it. But don't email me an assignment. All right, I get hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, and you emailing me an assignment will just get lost. So that there's that. But I will send you out a link for next week where it should go for next week, and then hopefully over the week I will sort this other bit out, and then it'll be smooth sailing from that point on. Although with technology, is it ever really smooth sailing? That's a good question, right? And the other thing is I have a naming convention, which I will show you for your assignments. You should do something like what I've done or something very similar to what I've done. And your initials should go on the file name for everything you hand in. Your initials should go on the file name for everything you hand in. All right? This way I can look at it and tell whose assignment it is just by looking at it. There's nobody that has this. I've had a couple of times in the past where I've had some students with the same initials, and I've had them use their middle initials, but there's none of that here this semester. So it should be good. And I'll definitely go over that again when I show you the assignment. And it's also in the class preferences PDF I sent you. Now, as far as the syllabus goes, there are a bunch of books listed in the syllabus. No textbooks for this class. I don't teach out of textbooks. I teach you what I know. And I find that gets better results than teaching out of a textbook. And also, the syllabus is an outline of the class, right? We are going to learn all of the things that are in that class, in the outline from the syllabus, but we're going to do it a little bit differently because we're not in person. If we were in person, I would do things a little bit differently. That also comes especially true in the second half of the class once we start learning how to record audio. And that brings me to the technology for the class. We have everything available to you to sign up and get out. If you're going to be an MAP student and you're going to be taking 5 semesters worth of classes with us, I would say the student subscription to Pro Tools, which is about $100 a year, it will probably be in your best interests. Otherwise, we have Pro Tools that you can sign out along with a USB authorization dongle that you can sign out. We have MIDI keyboards you can sign out. We have computers from the library that you can sign out. And for the second half of the class, and you should probably get everything all at once, we have recording kits that would consist of a microphone, a cable, headphones, audio interface, and there might be a couple of other things in there. Some cables to hook up the audio interface to your computer, and they come in a nice case. If you do that, you should probably think that you're not going to be able to take that easily on a bus or a subway. So the day that you go pick that up, you might want to get a ride or drive to the college so you could take it home in a car or get a ride. But I'm not sure how big they were because they were put together by Justin after we went online. So I haven't actually seen the recording kits, but the students have been using them for the past 4 semesters, and they've worked out really well. If you're a graduate student and you have an audio interface and you have a microphone, you don't need to get that stuff, okay? A lot of graduate students do have, or even if you have a USB microphone, that could work. I would have to get together with you and show you how to set Pro Tools up to use that because it's a little bit different. Now, the reason we use Pro Tools is it's the software that I know the best. That's the first thing. And second, it's cross-platform. A lot of students use Logic, like a lot of jazz graduate students went to Berkeley and they learned Logic there. Logic is only for Mac computers. And we have students that don't have Macs, they have PCs. Pro Tools works equally well on both platforms. So that's why we use it. I know that there are other software out there like Reaper, which works for both programs, and they're all great. There's so many great software out there. But I teach Pro Tools, and the way I teach it is that you are definitely going to learn how to use Pro Tools, but I will teach it to you in a way that you will take all the skills that you will acquire over the course of this semester, and then, or over the course of your MAP studies, if you're going to be minoring in MAP, and you will be able to port all those techniques over to any DAW, digital audio workstation, that you use in the future. They all have an edit/arrange page. They all have a piano roll editing. They all have velocity. They all have note duration. They all have quantizing. They all have a notation page. It's all similar, but it's just a matter of learning the terminology and how to navigate around the software. But once you develop the techniques, you will be able to transfer them off to different software fairly easily, because they're all the DAWs have so many similar so much similar functionality right now. Now, let me just see. Any questions so far? Great. So let's see. Now, just a couple technical things, and it's all spelled out in the syllabus, the preferences, and the house rules. I don't accept late assignments unless you email me to let me know it's going to be late. And I don't mean at 4:30 before the class starts. Part of what I am trying to do here is, well, let me go back. For those of you that don't know who I am and what I've done with myself, I am a graduate of Queens College. I went to undergraduate school from 1978 to 1982. I got a degree in music. Then I went out into the professional world in New York City, and I worked full-time as a keyboard player and then as a composer for films and television. And I was in some of the biggest Broadway shows between 1982 and when I stopped playing full-time in 2001. And I continued on after that subbing. I stopped playing shows 5 years ago. I was also in the Radio City Music Hall Orchestra. I played at Carnegie Hall with the New York Pops a bunch of times. I did recording sessions. I played jazz gigs out in clubs. I played with Don Cherry, Aretha Franklin, Allen Ginsberg. I've written music for films and television, scored 100 films, written over 2,000 pieces of music for broadcast television, big theme songs, FIFA World Cup theme for Fox Sports, stuff for ESPN, stuff that's been on PBS, NBC, CBS, ABC. I've had a long and incredibly successful career as a professional musician. And 10 years ago, Ed Smaldone, who was the department chair at that time, asked me if I would come back and start to teach these music technology programs. So this is my 20th semester of doing this as an adjunct, and I typically now teach 2 classes a semester, and I don't perform live that much anymore, but I still am very busy as a composer. I also put out my own music on CDs, live downloads, CDs, which don't sell that much anymore. I get it on all the streaming platforms. And I also run a YouTube channel, and it's not a huge channel. I've got about 5,000 subscribers as of today, but I put out regular content, music technology, music education, performance, product demos, product reviews, stuff like that. And your classes all the review videos will be up there. So the reason I don't use a textbook is I've been out in the real world, and I've been using Pro Tools for 20 years. I've been involved with music technology since I was in high school. We had a small electronic music studio when I was in high school, and my music teacher in high school took a practice room, a small piano practice room in my music building, in the music part of my high school. And he purchased a couple of synthesizers, a Mini Moog and a Moog Sonic 6. We had a 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder and a Spring Reverb in there and a turntable. And I started fooling around with synthesizers and recording when I was in high school. I would sign out what was called a Moog Sonic 6. It looked like a big suitcase synthesizer. I'd bring it home on the weekends and play around with it. And then when I was going to undergraduate school, I played in bar bands to pay for college. Back then, it was a different world. My first apartment in Queens, which was on Casino Boulevard, south of the college, south of Jewel Avenue, about 2 blocks. My rent on my apartment there was $125 a month. My first semester at Queens College cost $385 a semester or something like that. So it was a different world then. So I could go out and play 4, 5, sometimes 6 nights a week in bars and make a couple $100 a week in cash, and I could live easily and pay for my tuition and all my bills. I wasn't living extravagantly, but I did that, and I played synthesizers and keyboards in bands, top 40 bands, funk bands, wedding bands, you name it. Like, it was insane the amount of different groups I played in. And then once I got out of college and I started working professionally on shows, I started teaching myself more about recording and technology. I bought synthesizers, hardware sequencers, 4-track recorders, and I taught myself everything that I'm teaching you this semester, either through observation, trial and error, reading books, lately watching videos on YouTube, and also interacting with audio engineers that taught me a lot. So from about 1998 until about 2007, I rented a space on West 48th Street that I ran my business out of. And I had a room that was about 12 by 16, and I had my entire setup in there. And I was very busy working on independent films, television, music, and all this stuff. But in some of the other rooms were 3 guys who were incredible audio engineers. And when we'd have live recording sessions, I'd always observe how they set up microphones, all sorts of stuff. I would get mix tips from them. And so it was sort of like an apprenticeship. These were my friends, where I'd have questions and I'd ask them or they show me stuff. So this is sort of how I've learned what I'm teaching you. And I've been teaching, this is the 20th semester. I've watched people take these classes, come in knowing nothing and leave being very capable. So don't teach the same way every semester. I try to see what the students' talents and needs are and adjust my technique or my content to better enhance what people have or to build up what they are lacking. But I've seen really good results. So textbooks are great, but I don't teach this as a dry subject. You'll be making music shortly. This is the process of doing this is to create content, to learn how to make music. And our classes are all a combination of skill level. So in this class, I've got some music majors that are undergraduates. I've got a lot of people who are not music majors as undergraduates. They play an instrument. And they are a biology major, or maybe they're an accounting major, but they want to learn more about producing music, so they're taking these classes. And then I've got graduate students, and they typically are either Master of Science in Education majors, so school teachers, or they're masters in the jazz program. So it's a wide range of talent levels, and the assignments, except for the first assignment, are the same, except I expect more out of the graduate students, and I will make that clear as I make assignments. So yeah, the graduate students will do the same assignments as the undergraduates, but you will do more work and be expected to have better results than the undergraduate students. We don't have enough students to split this up into two classes, right? But it works. This has also worked out well. All right, it's never been an issue. And actually, during normal times, it works out really well because we have people who can play their instruments really well, the graduate students. And when we're in the studio during normal times, we can practice recording them, and it's a lot of fun typically. So that's the short story. Okay, any questions? I don't see anything. Okay, so today's class, also the other thing, if you're going to miss class, just send me an email. Let me know. In case there's something special that I want to go over in person, I might shift the class material if there's a lot of people absent. There'll always be a review video somewhere. If it's copywritten material, I may post it up on a Dropbox for you to watch or something like that, or on the Microsoft if I get that together. But there'll always be a class review video for you to watch. And so that people find that really helpful. And in certain ways, the review videos are so much better this way than the ones I was making when class was in person. That I think that in some ways teaching this class on Zoom is better. Where it doesn't get to be better, it still works, but it's not as good, is when we start to record live instruments. It doesn't get better at that point, sadly, because part of the fun of this class is when we're all together in the studio and we're working together as teams, and people are playing music together, and somebody's engineering, somebody's running Pro Tools, somebody's setting up the microphones, somebody's the producer, some people are the artist, and we do teamwork, and that's always a lot of fun, and that's something we definitely miss doing online classes. And hopefully next semester we can get back to more classes being online. I know more classes are online this semester than they were in the fall semester, but the lab where I teach is not, it's been cannibalized to make equipment available for the students to use. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't teach in person this semester. Okay, so we're going to break the class up into 3 segments today. The first segment is going to be on the history of sequencing, because what we're doing is we're going to learn how to use a sequencer, which is what a digital audio workstation is. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time going over the basic introduction to Pro Tools. And then we'll get to material that will be for the assignment, which will be a lot of fun. It has nothing, you don't need Pro Tools. Try to get everything set up for Pro Tools for next week. we'll have a good assignment that'll be very helpful and get you thinking in a different way about music. So let's see if this works. Great. All right. So that's my spreadsheet. So let me just go over this one more time. So is Penny here? Did he make it? Did not make it. And Alexander, have you made it? No.
That's my middle name. My first name is Jacob, if that's who you're talking about.
Jacob Alexander. Yes. Okay. Right. Okay. So you're here now. Great.
Yep.
Good. So we're just missing Penny. All right. He's. I sent him a link just before class started. Okay. So let's close this. So back in the day, when I first started doing this sequencing, you didn't have computers powerful enough and cheap enough to create music with. When I started really getting into this, which was about 1983 or 84, I'd had in the mid to late 70s, when I was in high school, the introduction, and I'd played keyboards live for all those years and still played keyboards live. But as far as creating music using electronic means, which is what we're doing, and as an aside, the computer is an instrument, right? That's what I want. One thing I want you to think of, right? I think of my computer as an instrument I play, like I play the piano, like I play the guitar, right? I play the computer, and the computer is a tool that helps me to create content. And the more techniques that you learn in terms of inputting and shaping the data that you've input, whether it's audio or MIDI, the more expressive and detailed the content you create will be. So back in the day, let's go back before I started. So you guys don't know this. This is Dr. Robert Moog. Okay? Dr. Moog was a student at Queens College in the 1950s. Yes. And then he went to Columbia, and he was not a music major. He was a physics major. He went to Columbia and then to Cornell, where he got his doctorate, I think in some sort of engineering. But he always had an interest in music and electronics. And my teacher at Queens College, Saul Berkowitz, who was teaching in the 1950s, had Dr. Moog in a couple of his music classes. It's interesting. Let me just zoom in for a second. This little suitcase here, that's the Sonic 6 that I used to sign out. Not the very same one, but that's the same model that I used to sign out and bring home. So Dr. Moog created, you've all heard instruments that he created. You cannot be alive in 2022, and you cannot be alive and not heard his music. Double negative there. Being alive, you've heard instruments that he's made. So this is right here. Let's open this up. Okay, I'll zoom in so you can see this. So these are some of the instruments he created. This thing in the back here, this is the System 55. This is a modular synthesizer. This is the Sonic 6, and this is the instrument that revolutionized music. This is the Mini Moog. And if you've ever heard Stevie Wonder, if you've ever heard Michael Jackson, if you've ever heard so much popular music, this has been playing bass on so many songs, the sound of this. This right here was a staple of academic places, electronic music, but it was also used by Keith Emerson in the late 60s, early 70s in the band Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And if you've ever heard the song Lucky Man by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, he takes a solo on this very instrument, his version of this instrument at the end. So this will all become apparent how this relates to Pro Tools as I go through this. So just hang tight for a minute. So this part of this instrument right here is all the sound generating tools. And this is all transistors, resistors, capacitors. It's analog. It's all driven by voltage. And you have voltage controlled oscillators that create timbres. You have and pitches. You have voltage controlled filters. You have voltage controlled that shape the sound. You have something called an envelope generator, which Dr. Moog invented, which shapes the contours of the sound, how the attack, how it sustains, how it decays, and how it releases after you let go of the keyboard. And it also has a filter which shapes the overtone series. And so that's what this is. And you have to use things called patch cables, which are like guitar cables, to route voltage from one of these modules to the next in order to control it. And that's something that we're going to learn is signal flow, signal routing, and that's also important in a DAW. But this thing up here, this is the sequencers that drove all of this stuff. And if you notice, this has these columns, right? Each one of these columns is a step. So this has 8 steps. And what that means is that it will play a sequence of 8 notes and then repeat the same pattern. You can alter the pitches in real time by tweaking these knobs above it, right? You can alter whether a step plays or doesn't play. You can create a rest by tweaking these knobs. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can change the tempo. There's a tempo knob. But this type of thing is the first sequencer. And this is all using voltage to control the components of this right here. And we're going to watch a performance using that shortly. Give me 1 second to take a sip of water. It always takes me a few weeks to get used to talking nonstop for 2.5 hours. By the time you got around to this, you'll notice there are no patch cables. This is all internally wired, but the signal flows from the left to the right on this. And we'll get into this at some other point, but I wanted to show you the picture of this because this is the antecedents to what we're doing in the computer today. Okay, so we're going to watch this video here. I'm not going to play the whole video, but this is a guy named Benji, and this is a very good explanation. I'm going to mute my mic right now and make this full screen, and I'm going to play this. So.
Okay, I'm going to show you a sort of basic patch on the Moog system, because it's a good way of sort of seeing how the signal flow works and explaining what all the different modules do. So first off, we can just listen to an oscillator. What I want to do is send the oscillator through a filter, so we'll listen to the output of the filter, which is here, and then send the oscillator into it. Okay, but what we actually want to do is control the frequency of this. Instead of doing it by hand, we'll use an envelope to do it. So we've got a patch in an envelope. So the input to the envelope, and we're going to send the trigger from the sequencer and send the output of the envelope to the input of the filter.
Okay, I want to stop. Whoops. Oh, come on. How did I do that? Give me 1 second. There's always technical issues.
The sequencer
Okay.
voltage.
So what you're going to see on the sequencer is that there's going to be a light that shines somewhere on there. I think he's covering it as it goes through these. Oh, right on the top row here. It'll go light, 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 and then it repeats. So you'll see each one of these things right here light up as it goes through. And I'm zooming in. You can actually see 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't say anything there because the name is covering up where the number would be 6, 7, 8, and then it repeats. So you'll just see those lights go right through as he's playing the sequencer. So let's get back to that.
Out to control the frequency of the oscillator so that it makes a little melody. And before I do that, I'm going to send it out, the output of the voltage from the sequencer, I'm going to send it to a quantizer so that it jumps in perfect semitones rather than just sort of random voltages. So we send the output voltage from the sequencer into a quantizer, and then the quantizer to the input of doesn't reach to the input of the sorry, I need a longer lead of the oscillator, which is here. So now when I start it, these are now controlling the pitch of that oscillator. So each time I change the voltage on each of these steps, it'll change the pitch. Okay, another thing you can do is send the voltage to control the frequency of the filter as well. And then you can just play with all the different parameters, like the decay level, the filter settings. Pulse width. Or the frequency. Cool.
Okay, so that's our first little bit, right? So let's look at another one, a little bit different. Instead of being so mechanical, let's look at something that's a little bit different. So this is a performance done. So the Moog System 55 was produced in the 60s. About 7 or 8 years ago, the Moog company, at some point like in the early 80s, I think, or they lost the rights to their name and they were out of business for ages. And then eventually Dr. Moog won the rights to the name back, and around 20 years ago, he started producing Moog synthesizers again, updated Moog synthesizers again, and he's since passed on. But there was such a demand by a certain part of the music community for the original since that he put out, that they started sourcing as many of the parts as they could, and they made recreations as close as possible to the original. So this is an instrument. This was made in 2015. This video, right? That's about when they started putting out the remade System 55. And you basically, if you want one of these things, they're like $50,000. You call up, and then 6 months later, it'll show up at your door. So this is a woman named Suzanne Ciani, and she's actually mostly known for playing a synthesizer called the Buchla, which is the West Coast equivalent of Moog. Moog's original company was up by Ithaca, right? Because he went to Cornell, and he started his company. It was up in an area called Trumansburg, which is right by Ithaca in upstate New York, or in the southern tier of New York. And Suzanne got her keyboard from this Buchla, which was the equivalent, although it never got as popular as the Moog because it was so much, very complicated to program, but she became an expert at it. And throughout the 70s and 1980s, Suzanne was one of the most in-demand session musicians for playing on advertising music. And one of her claims to fame was that back in the 70s, there was a bottle of 7-Up carbonated beverage, and they'd show the person taking a bottle opener and flipping the top open. Then you hear the fizz of the carbonated beverage as it overflowed through the top of the glass. That wasn't really a recording of the 7-Up. That was a sound that she generated, and she made a lot of money on that. And she started her own advertising music company that I had a couple of friends work at. I don't know her personally, but she, at some point in the 1990s, sold all of that, moved out into the Bay Area, and she's been putting out ambient piano-based and electronic music since then. I think she made enough money where she didn't have to work the rest of her life. She sold her business probably for quite a bit of money. So this is her performing on the Moog System 55. Not sure it's the greatest piece of music, but just show you another style of music that this is capable of creating. So here we go. So that's more of a live performance than what Benji was doing the first video. The first video was an introduction. And then with this video, you're seeing some of the possibilities. I could have used some other stuff in there to make it a stronger piece of music, but I think it's representative of some of the things you can do with this type of technology. Now, there's other stuff that you can do, and stuff started making its way into pop music, not just to play bass lines with the Mini Moog, but to actually take the synthesizer and feed other instruments into its audio input, and using some of the parameters in the synthesizer create rhythmic vitality and sort of systems music, almost very reminiscent of Reich and Glass, with very little actual playing of the instrument. So the person who started doing this and is the most popular, most known, is Pete Townsend of the rock band The Who. And this is a photograph of him around 1970, 69. This is the ARP 2500. So ARP was a competitor of Moog, and this is one of the first synthesizers they came out with. ARP stood for Alan R. Perlman. That's the guy who invented it, ran the company, and Moog was Robert Moog's last name. And this is similar to the Moog System 55, except instead of having patch cables, it's very hard to see up here because this video is very grainy, but there are these little sliders up here that you can use to affect the sound along with these knobs. So let's take a look at what he's got to say. The other thing I'd like to say is that he had a whole setup in a small room in the house that he was living in London with his family, and he would create demos for the band to play of a lot of their most famous songs. And eventually he ended up having a multi-track tape recorder inside of his house, and a lot of the synthesizer parts that were on the demo actually ended up on the final product that they would create in the studio, and the other musicians of the band would play along with his pre-recorded tracks. So that was really far-reaching, forward-thinking techniques that were not available or being done by anybody else at that time, but became standard and commonplace by the time the 1980s rolled around.
About this album is the two tracks, Barbara O'Reilly and Won't Go Forward Again, use a synthesizer in a completely different way than anyone had ever used one before, where it actually provides a rhythm. I mean, it's not just a sound, but it's a rhythm as well. To the best of my knowledge, the first time anybody had used a synthesizer like this, first of all, nobody I knew anyway knew how to work them. I mean, they were really difficult to program and get to any kind of sound out of.
When I did the sound for Won't Get Fooled Again, I didn't have this bit. This was a bit that I got during the demos. And so by the time I'd finished the demos, I knew how to work it. But what I did have is a much simpler synthesizer, very much like this one. The one that I actually had, you can see in the photographs, it was with this organ with the EMS synthesizer on the top of it. That was the rig that I used. And basically what I did is took the output of the organ, put it through a filter, which is what they call, it's on sample and hold. You get these random voltages coming out and a voltage sweep. Just a simple kind of synthesizer, normal standard sound, which a lot of people would be familiar with. I suppose I was just sitting there, you know, playing this for hour after hour, you know, and just kind of getting into it, really. Very, very simple chords, obviously, you know, almost kind of naively simple, but on the other hand, you know, the end result is extraordinarily harmonically complex. Give myself a 32 bar then, you know. playing through the chords. And what's interesting here is what happened to the organ. Remember I'd done a backing track, and the organ just suddenly becomes a solo, and I don't really... There's no edits, it's just me playing, you know, and turns into this beautiful little kind of... You know, something I could never have written on paper. But very, very, very disciplined. You know, with counterpoint in there and, you know, bits of fugal stuff. Just brilliant. And I'm just playing and I'm following the music. I'm not writing it, I'm following it as I play, you know. And of course Who fans will know this because this was the whole centrepiece of the Who show with the lasers and Roger looking like some kind of furry animal.
Furry animal. All right. So you see, you know, my point here is that the technology started infecting what was popular at the time, and people started hearing all of these sounds. So then in the 1980s, something came along which changed the course of music. One of the things that changed the course of music, there were a lot of things that happened in the 1980s that changed the course of music. Sometimes I would say some of it was for the better and some of it was for the worse, the much worse. But something was invented called MIDI, and that was a protocol called Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So when you're looking at this synthesizer here, and you're looking at the Moog System 55, those are all analog. They're made out of transistors, things soldered together, PCB boards, you know, voltages going through everything. There's no microprocessors in the synthesizers. Everything is done with voltage, changing the amount of voltage and how it flows through all the different components. The first time, to my knowledge, that a microprocessor was used inside of a synthesizer was done because the biggest problem with playing live with synthesizers, well, the first problem is that the oscillators were very temperamental and they would change tuning depending upon the temperature. So you'd have to in the studio, you'd have to let the synthesizer warm up for half an hour. You have to tune it. You have to come back in half an hour, tune it again. And then maybe things would settle in and you could start playing and record some stuff and you'd have to check the tuning again. So that's in the studio, which has a controlled environment. Imagine out on a stage outdoors where the sun is beating down on the thing. Very stable, unstable tuning. That started getting better. But the other thing was that getting the sounds needed to be done much more quickly. You could not sit there between songs and spend 5 minutes twiddling knobs and sound checking to get your sound right. Or in the studio, you may have recorded a piece using a synthesizer with 3 or 4 sounds not happening at the same time, but happening in different sections of the song. And you needed a way to be able to pull that off live with just one instrument instead of having to carry 4 or 5 instruments around, because once that happens, you're making things much more complicated and the chance of a screw up is multiplied exponentially. So the first use of the microprocessor in a synthesizer was so that you could have memory recall. And from my perspective, there might be something earlier, but the first instrument that had that was something called the Prophet 5 by Sequential Circuits. And that had 128 slots, and it just had a 3-digit LCD that said 001, 002, and some buttons on the lower part of the synthesizer panel below the controls and above the keyboard, where you could scroll through the different patches, so that if you were doing a show, you could program song 1 with sounds 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You could program song 2 on your set with 6, 7, 8, 9, and then program song 3 with 10, 11, 12, 13, and you could just scroll through. You could hook up a foot pedal and use your foot to scroll through all the different patch changes. And there'd be no information except that there wouldn't even be a name of the patch. It'd just be the number. And I did that when I was, that was still the vogue when I got out of college, and I was working in shows in the city. So my first job in the city was playing keyboards with the original off-Broadway production of Little Shop of Horrors, which I was at for 5 years. And we used something called a Poly 6. The keyboard player, which is what I was doing, played a Fender Rhodes electric piano, a Korg organ, and a Korg Poly 6, which was a 6-note polyphonic. It actually was paraphonic because everything used the same filter, but a synthesizer that you could play 6 notes at a time on. So you could, and the way that the show was set up was that it had 4 banks of, I don't know if it was 10 sounds on each bank, but you would just scroll through every song, just going to the next sound, the next sound, the next sound. And some of the sounds would repeat, but instead of going back from like let's say you're on bank C and you're at patch 8, and the next patch would be the same sound as A1, instead of pushing 2 buttons to get back to A1 and then 2 buttons to get back to C9, you would just make it the very next one, even if it was the same sound. And that's how Broadway shows were programmed for my entire time playing them, except that the synthesizers and the keyboards started getting LCDs that were larger with more information on it. So that's the first time that there used to be there was a microprocessor in a synthesizer, as far as I'm aware. But everybody had a different protocol for communication. Things, right? Some of it used CV, some of it used different methods of communication between the different synthesizers. They wouldn't talk to each other nicely. So around the beginning of the 1980s, all the manufacturers got together and they developed a protocol called MIDI, which is Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And that got launched in 1984. And I purchased, at that time, a bunch of synthesizers that had MIDI in it. I purchased something called a DX7. I purchased something called a Juno 106 by Roland. I purchased something a few years later called a Mirage by Ensoniq. I also purchased several drum machines at that time by Yamaha. They all had MIDI. You could communicate. And the brains of everything was a hardware sequencer that was different than the sequencer in the Moog in that it did not shoot out control voltages. It shot out computer information over the MIDI protocol. And the MIDI protocol is a 5-pin DIN cable that you plug, and I'll show you that when I get back to my home in a few weeks. But it's a cable that you plug into your synthesizer or your drum machine or whatever you've got, and you plug it into another one, and they can communicate back and forth. So you've got a MIDI out from one keyboard to the MIDI in of a second keyboard, and you could play one synthesizer like the DX7, and it can control the sounds and the notes being played on the second synthesizer. So all of a sudden you had this immediate way to layer all these sounds together. And then you had these hardware sequencers that had multi-tracks that you could create complex arrangements if you had 10 or 15 synthesizers, all being controlled by this one little unit that had a 2-digit LCD that was maybe, if this is my phone, maybe it was like the size of this little corner here, up here, right? And it was very complicated. And to save things, you had to hook up a crappy, realistic Radio Shack cassette recorder and record the sync tone, which was like, it sounded like the original AOL dial-up modem sound. And that was very tricky to do. I could never get that to work consistently. It was very finicky. Eventually, the sequencers got more sophisticated with a bigger LCD on it, more buttons on it, and a floppy disk where you could store all your sequences onto the floppy disk. And so I had one of those by Roland. My first sequencer was I had 2 sequencers by Yamaha. then one by Roland that had the floppy disk, and I was in heaven. And because it was so easy to save sequences and I could come back to them, and it would recall all the patches that I had set up in my synthesizers, and it worked really well. And I used that till about 1991, and then I got a computer. And then the computer, at that time, I used this piece of software called Vision, and it did all the things that my hardware sequencers did, except it did it in the computer, and it spit out that information and controlled all the synthesizers. Then eventually, they started adding audio into these sequencers, and the paradigm that they pursued was the 24-track studio model. And the reason they did that was the main people that were going to be using this software were audio engineers and composers. And they wanted something that was familiar to the audio engineer so that they wouldn't be as resistant to switching to it. They would be less resistant to switching to it because they were familiar with the layout, the routing, the terminology. And that's sort of all DAWs except Ableton and Bitwig right now are still based around that 24-track studio paradigm with additions, with other things that have been added on top of it, but at the core of it all, it's still based on that. Now, over the past several years, hardware sequencers have made a comeback. Analog modular synthesizers have made a big time comeback with Eurorack. And so let me show you a video that I made of me performing. And let me just show you something before I play it. Okay, so this right here, let me show you this, switch screen. And if I forget to switch screens, please say something. It's a lot for me to work on here. This right here, this box here, this is something called a circuit. And you notice it's got pads, right? 8 pads going from here to here. And this is a sequencer that also has drum and some synthesizer sounds built in. And you program this to play things, and it just sort of cycles back and forth, and you can change things on the fly. You can do similar things that you could with the Moog, but it's all done digitally. But it also has control voltage, and I can use this to control this, which is a little analog synthesizer. So I've got a cable coming out of here, going into this box, going into here. And it controls the timing of this. And then once I get that basic sequence going, I can improvise stuff over that. And then this box up here, and there's a box over here. Those are just digital effects. This is a digital delay, and this is a reverb. So let me play a little bit of this, and we're not going to listen to the whole thing, but you'll get an idea as to what's currently being used. All right, I think you get the idea of that. So, it's just fun to play around with. That's one thing to do. Now, the other thing that's happened too is that you can make music inside of iPads, iPhones, and with this, I'm using something called the synthesizer, this right here, and that's playing a sequence. And over that, I'm playing around on another iPad with something called the Animoog. So let's take a look at this. This is, again, sequencer, and this is the Animoog. This is the synthesizer. So it's, again, a sequencer inside of your iPad. Okay, so that's just a little taste of that. Now, the thing about this is that the music's very repetitive, right? It's just this constant same tempo, same pulse. Things repeat over and over again. You can change timbres, you can change notes and everything, but it's fun. It can be very creative, but it's also can be very static if you listen to it, right? Let's take a look at let's just take a listen to something. Okay, so this is all sequenced, right? Yeah.
Share the screen.
So that's a rough mix of the opening cue of a film I'm working on right now for ESPN. And that's all sequenced. The only, I created a sampler instrument, which is something we do in Audio MIDI too. It's about a sporting person who's a basketball player. So I went down to my basement and I recorded a bunch of basketballs and then made sampler instruments so that some of the percussion that you were hearing on that, I actually played on the keyboard as basketballs. It's kind of fun. So, and that's just one example. I could play you so many different styles of music that I've done using a sequencer, but all the antecedents are in what we went over for the past 40 minutes, right? Led us up to this point now where the sequencers are incredibly sophisticated. The power of your phone, your laptops, your iPads, whatever. Like there's more technology in this phone than got us on the moon in 1969, right? So just think about that. And, the processing power that's out now is just so incredibly powerful. And what this technological revolution has led to is sort of a democratization of the music creation. But the sad side of that is there are people that aren't good musicians that put out garbage. And there's a lot of that. There's great music being made now. It's hard to find. But there's a lot of really bad music being made in people's bedrooms, that gets out there. But like I said, I'm not hey, get off my lawn because I'm a boomer. I think there's a lot of great music being made now. I just think it's not as easily accessible as it was when I was younger. Because it's all driven by lawyers and suits, and it's just a really strange thing. I've been thinking about this whole controversy with Spotify over the past week, and it's a situation where there's incredible opportunity, but there's also much more competition now, and there's so much content out there that it's really hard to wade through it all. That's sort of my point. All right. So that's the introduction of that. So let's talk about a few things. Now, when you download and install Pro Tools, make sure you install Expand 2, XPAND 2, and the Air Instruments bundle, and all like the Pro Tools plugins. So it's not just Pro Tools, the software. You have to install these other things. Justin, if you've gotten it from us, Justin will show you what stuff to get. If you're going to get Pro Tools yourself, you'll have to get all that set up, and then it's in your account where that is. I think what I'll try to do is make a video where I can block out my account number, my credit card number, which is why I don't have it shown now. I just, before class, I was noticing that it becomes too visible, and I don't really want that out in the ether if this is going to go up on the internet. And the other thing is that I may cut some of what we just heard out of the video and post that part of the video up online, because that might get this video blocked, the stuff with Pete Townsend, the stuff with Moog and Benji's video. So those 3 bits might get us in a little bit of trouble. So let's go and spend a few minutes talking about the basic setup with Pro Tools. So a couple of things. If you've got a Mac, right, you have to set up your computer to work with Pro Tools properly. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to your system preferences, right? And let me zoom in on this so it's easier for you to see. And you're going to go to Spotlight. Then you're going to go to Keyboard, right? You see how I did that? I went to Keyboard and then Shortcuts. And you see right here, typically, hold on a sec. On your Mac, these will be checked. You want to uncheck these because Pro Tools uses those key commands. Right? I typically do this. I make sure this is checked because I use these to navigate around Pro Tools. These are your function keys. What will then happen is that if you want to use the function keys for what you're normally used to, you'll have to push the FN button and then hit them. You don't have to do this, but I recommend you do it. It makes navigating around certain things very easy. And then the other thing, make sure that you've got the secondary click set up. Click on the right side so that if I say right click something, you'll be able to do that. If you don't, you'll have to hold down, I believe it's Control click. So those are some things to set up. Now, there is a playlist where I go over all this stuff, and let me put the link in the chat. Oh, here we go. Here it comes. That's a link to a series of about 8 or 9 short videos, maybe 10 minutes long, where I go through setup. I go through everything I'm about to go through now, but in bite-sized chunks, right? Now, I made these videos 4 years ago. There are new features in Pro Tools since then, but the basic idea of all those is still valid. When it becomes invalid, I'll redo them, but they still work. So that's a really good resource. They're very, like I said, they're bite-sized chunks. So if you got 10 minutes, you can watch the video and get some knowledge instead of having to search through an entire 2-hour video. Even with chapters, that can become cumbersome. All right, so Pro Tools is typically in your applications folder. Pro Tools looks like this. What I do for myself is I drag Pro Tools down to the dock. And so that I've got Pro Tools on the dock right here. Easy for me to access. I was using Pro Tools before. So if I want to open Pro Tools, I can just go to the dock and click on it and Pro Tools will boot up. Now, the first time you boot up Pro Tools, it may take a long time to boot up. It has to scan all the plugins and create preferences and do all that. And then subsequent times of booting up will be quicker. So this is your dashboard. And let me zoom in on this so it becomes easier for you to see. It's got 3 tabs here. Projects, we're not going to work on this. And that's another thing. I'm not going to show you everything in Pro Tools. That's not the purpose of this class. I'm going to show you the basic things you need to work. And I'm going to add things in little by little. I'm going to feed you them. So there's all sorts of stuff that I'm going to show you in a minute, but I'm not going to explain it in detail. I'll explain things in detail that are going to be your foundation and add some of those other things as the class moves forward. It's confusing enough as it is, and I just want to simplify it. So I've got this set to show on startup, right? Whoops, let me get this down here. And you won't worry about projects because we're not going to be storing stuff in the cloud. So you've got create, that's going to be your first bit. You're going to make sure that local storage is set. You're not going to create from template. You will set the file type to bwf.wave. This is something right here that I want you to get used to. This rectangle here, that has a pull down menu. Whenever you see a downward facing triangle in Pro Tools, it's all over the place. That means when you click on it, there will be another menu with alternate choices underneath. We work with bwf.wave files. Our bit depth is going to be 24-bit. you guys will be working at 44.1 sample rate. I use 48 because film and television uses 48, and I just have mine set there. I/O settings are going to be last used. Now, let me just get this up here. Hold on one sec. Prompt for location. It's going to boot up. I think your first time up will be here. You want to prompt for location. Okay. And yours is going to say users, your name, and documents. I don't want you to save things in documents. What I want you to do for our class is notice the proper way to do this is to have multiple drives. I've got a drive here, my hard drive, I've got a project drive, and I've got 2 sample drives. This is 16 terabytes worth of sample drives, and this is 4 terabytes worth of drive for my projects. And then I've got external drives that I can plug in when I need more access. But for our class, what we're going to do is you're going to create a folder on your desktop, and you're going to call it, and you're going to name it RSF, Recording Studio Fundamentals, Spring 22, something like that, right? And this is where all your projects are going to live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my first project. And I want to show you something, and this is in the class preferences, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how we are going to name all our projects. And the reason I want you all to do this is that a big part of learning this study is learning file management and organization. If you're not organized, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. If you don't understand how to manage your files, you're going to run into a lot of troubles. It's going to make your life miserable looking around for stuff. So we're going to have a unified way of titling things. When you get out of the class, you can do whatever you want. I don't care, but it just makes everybody's life easier if we have uniform names for projects. Okay, so the first part of your name is going to be the project, and you're going to write it with no spaces between the words. The second part is going to be the date, and that's going to be separated out from the title by an underscore. After the date, there'll be another underscore, and then there will be your initials. So let's say I'm going to call this project test, just for fun, right? I'll call it RSF test, right? So I capitalize Recording Studio Fundamentals and I capitalize test underscore today's date 2-2-22. You cannot use in Pro Tools, there are illegal characters. You cannot use backslashes, all right? You have to use dashes and underscores. Underscore my initials. Okay, so that is the basic format of file naming. And if you think that I don't put my money where my mouth is, right? I have some form of that. Mine are a little bit more complicated because I've got Q numbers, but it's all the same. Let's see. Right, you see all of these. They're all the same. It's very organized, and I know what everything is. So I basically have you guys do what I do. When you leave, I think it would be very helpful for you if you don't have to, no rule saying you have to do this, but once you get out of the class, the one thing I would hope you would continue on is a uniform way of organizing and titling your projects. Okay, so I've got prompt for location here. I'm going to hit this bottom button called Create. And then I'm going to navigate to my desktop to right here. And I'm going to save. So let's go back to this folder, and I want to show you something. Pro Tools has just created a folder, a subfolder inside of our project folder. And this is a big thing that I want you guys to learn the difference. The first bit here is this folder is called the project folder, right? When you open it up, you're going to see a bunch of assets in that folder. Pro Tools created all these things. And all of these things that are inside of this folder, they need to, all these other subfolders and this guy right here, which I'm going to talk about in a second, they all need to be inside of the parent session folder. These all need to be in this folder. They don't need to be like outside the folder over here somewhere like this, right? So that when I close this, they're in a different place. No, they all need to be inside of this folder. Now, what Pro Tools has done has created a bunch of folders here that have no content inside of them, right? I open them up, they're blank. Pro Tools is waiting for you to do something, and it will automatically put your content inside of those folders, and it knows how to access them. That's why the file hierarchy, the structure of the folder, the subfolders is very important to understand. And I'm going to be going over this week after week after week because you're all going to make mistakes. Trust me, and we'll fix them and you'll get it after a bit. Now, we've got this folder right here, which has the Pro Tools icon, and it's got a word called session. This is not a folder, this is a file. This is the session file, and you'll know it because it's got the .ptx extension at the end. That's the Pro Tools extension. It lives inside of the session folder. So you've got the session folder and the session file. All right? Folder and the file. So now let me close this session. I'm going to save those. And notice inside of the session folder, those other folders have disappeared. There's nothing in them. Pro Tools doesn't need them. The session folder is here, and I would just double click on that and it would open it up. And notice these folders all came back. So when you close the session out, the only items and data that is inside of the session folder are the items that Pro Tools needs to run the session. Okay? Great. So this is your edit window, and this can be customizable, and we're going to go over that in more detail next week because I want to make sure I have enough time to go into the assignment for next week. And also there are preferences that you need to set up, and I'll go over that next week once you guys all are all set up with Pro Tools. But basically, this top line here, this is the toolbar. It's got all your tools that you need to work, and this is customizable. This area here, this is your ruler. It measures things. It measures tempo. It measures the meter. It measures the key. It gives you markers. It measures bars and beats, minutes and seconds. Customizable. And this is your edit window, right? So this is your edit page and your edit window inside of the page. And this is where all the action is going to happen. So let me just spend a couple of minutes. Let's just leave it at that for now, all right? So we went over how to name things. I showed you the folder structure and gave you a very quick rundown of the Pro Tools session, what it looks like on the edit page. We'll get into much more detail about this whole thing next week because I won't have that whole long introduction spiel to give you with the history of sequencing. I'll try to have something like that every week, but maybe it'll be a half an hour instead of an hour. All right, an hour and 20 minutes or whatever it was. But let's leave this here and let's start talking about what's for the assignment for next week. So let me ask you guys some questions. I'm going to look over at you now and away from the camera. When you listen to music, what do you actually listen for? Let's have a discussion. Oh, is this the information on the YouTube videos? Yes, yes, Rachel. What I just showed you there is on those short videos, and it's also going to be on this video, which I'll upload to YouTube probably by Friday. So, and you'll have reference for that for the whole semester. Okay, so let's have a conversation. when you listen to a piece of music, you're typically listening with your earbuds from your phones or your laptops, right? None of you have a stereo system, most likely, with speakers. What do you listen for when you're listening to a music? Right? What do you listen
I
for?
personally listen for the
Who's this?
lyrics
Who's
because
this?
I like, making a meaning out of a song.
Just say your name until I listen until I get to, because I've got myself
Oh,
pinned here, so I can't see who's
this
talking.
is Rachel
All right,
Ferguson.
I'll learn your voices soon enough. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yes. So I just listen for the lyrics.
Chelsea listens for the melody. Rachel listens for the lyrics because she wants to understand the story of the song, right? Anyone else?
Professor, I usually go for the beat, so definitely
Okay.
the
Listen for the beat.
what tempo it's at, how the bass, basically the whole beat, kind of the song.
Okay. Anyone else?
I listen for vocals
Uh-huh.
and also harmonies because that's something I have trouble with as a singer.
Okay. And Brianna listens to ad libs and background vocals. So what I'm going to say here as a generalized thing, not 100% accurate, but mostly accurate, is that you all listen to what you're interested in, right? What you're interested in. You're interested in the melody. You're interested in the vocalist. You're interested in the lyrics, right? When I read a story once about John Coltrane, right? John Coltrane, one of the greatest musicians, American musicians ever. That can't really even be debated. When he would study a piece of music, he didn't have a score. He would get the recording that he was studying, and he'd listen to the recording once and just get an overview of the feel of the music, the background, like, does he know the melody? Does he know the song? Is it a new piece of music? Then once he gets that and he gets familiar with the recording, in a general sense, he started to fine tune, right? And then what he would do is start from the bottom up. And he would listen to either the drums or the bass over, and he would listen to the piece of music and focus in on tuning everything out and just listening to what the drummer was doing. And he'd listen over and over again until he memorized and could sing back everything that the drummer was doing. He'd do the same thing next with the bass, right? He'd listen to just the bass and be able to sing eventually all the bass notes that were played in the piece of music that he could sing. Then he'd listen to the drums and bass together and hear how they interact with each other and how they work. And then, let's say it was a quartet, a jazz quartet, saxophone, piano, bass, and drums. He'd listen to the pianist. He'd focus in on the piano until he could hear everything the piano did. If he had some chord voicings he really liked, he'd sit down at the piano and try to figure them out and sort of get that vocabulary into his system and maybe write out some of the notes that the pianist was playing if there were some interesting chord voicings. He'd listen to how the piano player fit in with the bass player. Was the pianist playing the root in the pinky of his left hand, or was he leaving the root out of the chord so that the bass player could fill that in? What register was the pianist playing his chords in? Was it around middle C? Was he playing things where his left hand was playing four notes and his right hand was playing octaves with a note in it, kind of like Red Garland? What was he doing, and how did it work with the bass and the drums? And he basically memorized what each guy was doing individually and then what groups of instruments were doing together. And then he'd do the same thing with the lead instrument, so that by the time he had listened to the song 50, 75, 100 times, he had it all memorized individually and every instrument and as an aggregate whole of the entire piece, right? And that's how you study. That's a great way to study music, because you don't just listen to one thing. You listen to that, like, let's say, for example, you listen to the lyrics and you want to be interested in the story, how does the music support that? Because music and art can be boiled down to one word. All music and all art can be boiled down to one word. That word is story, right? And in our case, what we do as musicians is different than what a painter does. What a painter does is create something in time, over time, that is, it's not static because there's a lot of stuff going on in the painting, but it's just there as a whole that you can just look at. And then you could take your time and look all the details and how things relate and see where the tension is and see how the colors contrast and see where the point of focus is. Is it like, and then you can look at the rule of thirds. Is something in the upper right-hand corner or is it in the lower left-hand corner? How does that balance out with the other side? All that stuff. But it doesn't happen. That all is done. All the storytelling is done for the final product. With what we do, you spend a lot of time creating the story, and the story is only experienced temporarily over time, right? And as time unfolds, the introduction and the development of all of the elements of the piece of music that you are listening to help to create the story that you are trying to tell. They can work in concert with the story. They can work against the story. They can work in varying degrees here and there. Now, when you're listening to music, what I want you to conceptualize is 4 different concepts, right? 4 different concepts. Top to bottom. High pitch to low pitch. What's happening in the different pitch registers? You know, what's playing the high pitch notes? What's playing the low pitch notes? What's playing in the middle? Front to back. Does something sound like it's right in your face, or does it sound like it's off in the distance? What I mean by that is, let's say you're in a concert hall. Are you in the first row or are you in the back row? Right? When you're listening to a piece of music, is somebody in the front of the stage or in the back of the stage? Left to right. Is the sound coming in your left ear, in the center, or in the right ear? And then dynamics, soft to loud. Is this section soft? Is the next section loud? And the relationship of volume between all the different instruments. How loud is the bass in relationship to the vocal? How loud is the drum in relationship to the vocal? And all of these elements that I'm talking about are not static. They are vibrant, living entities that evolve and change over time, over the piece of music you're listening to. And they have a different effect on the listener depending upon how long the piece is and where these elements change over the timeline of that piece. Right? So there's all this stuff to listening to music that I want you to start expanding your listening palette, your listening vocabulary. Think about it like this. You go to see a musical, okay? A musical is typically 2.5 hours long. At the end of the 2.5 hours, the main character should have undergone a transformation over that time. Over the course of the story, the main character is typically, occasionally it's true, it is, but typically is not on stage all the time. There's there's backstory that's going on. Sometimes the main character is the only person on stage. Sometimes there's 2 people on stage. Sometimes there's a whole ensemble. And then during a song, that might be a whole ensemble. There might be moments where you're focused in on the main character or some side characters. The main character may start off in one costume and end up in another costume. The main character may start off with hair that's dark, and by the end of the thing, they have a gray beard and gray hair, and they're wearing a suit that makes them overweight, looking overweight as they get age and all that stuff. Or their appearance changes over time, right? They may be, as you're looking at the stage left or stage right. They may be sometimes in the center. They may be in the front of the stage, in the back of the stage. The orchestration might be just the pianist playing. There might be a full tutti with the whole orchestra. The song might be slow. It might be fast. And where all of this activity is placed over those 2.5 hours takes you on like a roller coaster ride that you can sort of ride the waves like you're a surfer out in the Pacific, right? And you're catching a big one, or you're out in Hawaii, and you're riding that wave, and it takes you on a journey. It helps you tell you a story. And all great art, whether it's pop music, which I still think great pop music is art, or whether it's a classical orchestral piece or a chamber piece, or whether it's a jazz piece, or whether it's B.B. King singing the blues, or Howlin' Wolf wailing away on one chord, or Bo Diddley playing one chord, or whether it's Public Enemy, Chuck D telling a story, or any of the current people that are really good telling stories. They all have all these elements having at different times. And to only focus in on one thing, you're subliminally getting the story. It's affecting you if you like the song, but to dive in and understand what that is will enhance and enrich you as a musician and also as a creative artist, and will give you a greater appreciation as to all the work that goes into creating this art. Okay, so I have a new switcher. I have a video switcher on my desk that changes all the scenes. I used to do it in this thing called OBS, but I was having problems with that last semester. It kept on freezing. So I had a switcher. I upgraded to a better switcher, which also I like for my YouTube videos, but I just have to get used to the controls a little bit more. I'm still not 100% slick on it yet. So, downloads, let's see. Okay, so this is the folder that I asked you to download, and inside this folder are a bunch of MP3s, right? Okay, so I've got Black Cow here. Black Cow is a song by Steely Dan. And we're going to play the song in a minute, but I want to show you something that I made for this. Okay. So this is something, and let me zoom in so you can see it a little better. Okay, there we go. This is a panning map, right? And it gives us 2 dimensions. It gives us left, center, and right, and it gives us high pitch to low pitch. And I've got the players here. And you're not going to do this, but I'm going to show you. This is one way that I study music sometimes when I study a mix. I've got everything color coded. So I've got my drums are this color blue, right? So the kick drum is low pitched. Tom-toms are the next highest. Snare drum is higher than that. Ride cymbal is up here, and hi-hats, that's where they're panned, and they're the highest pitched drums. This dark blue right here, that's electric piano. That's sort of envelopes this whole area here and a little bit above pitch-wise, and it's panned in the center. Then these peach-colored ones right here in the middle, those are the brass. And brass, just before the second chorus, it's panned left. The first entrance is panned in the center. The second time, just before the second chorus, it's overdubbed which means they played a second pass, and that's panned right. And you can distinctly hear two different brass playing in the left and the right. Okay, then before we get to the vocals, we've got on the left, we've got a clean guitar playing a rhythm. And we've got on the right a clavinet, which is an electric keyboard, which is similar to a harpsichord in that the notes are plucked instead of struck with a hammer like on a piano. And then the clavinet has an effect on it called a phase shifter or a flanger. It's debatable which one it is. Okay, and then these green are the vocals. The higher pitched, the higher ones here are female vocals singing, right? And there's sometimes when they're in the middle, sometimes when they're in the left, and sometimes they're panned left and right. They had three singers. They recorded one pass and went to the left, and they recorded a second pass and panned it on the right. And then the lead vocal, which is Donald Fagen, is right in the middle. And then there's another chorus with Donald Fagen and the background singers, singing Big Black Cow, spread all left and right with the lead vocal in the middle. And then the other thing is that there is the reverb and effects. The lead vocal reverb is panned to the right, and the clavinet reverb is panned to the left. So that's kind of interesting. So let's take a little listen to that. Oh, we'll keep this open, but let me play this. Oh, come on. Give me 1 second here. Let me get this a little better. Okay, great. If I play it in preview mode, you don't get to see the PDF. It stops the vocal, the music. In the corner of my eye, clean guitar over here. I saw you in Rudy's. You were very high. You were high. Right there, female background vocals, panned left and right. Clavinet over on the right. Electric piano in the middle. Drums in the middle. Bass in the middle. Was a book of numbers and your remedies. One of these surely will screen out the sorrow. But give me 1 second here, my friends. So you'll hear that the guitar comes in with the we are, boop beep we are, and the electric piano is playing the same part. The clavinet is doubling the bass guitar. So let's hear if you can pick that out. Right, it's just going brink, but you hear the clavinet, bee dum bum. Now the vocals come in. We are. The piano and the guitar. The piano and guitar going we are, boop it we are. See if you can pick that. Just hear that even over the Zoom audio. In the corner of my eye. Piano doubling the clavinet and the guitar. You were very high. You were high. It was a crying disgrace. They saw your face on the counter by your keys. Now let's listen to the beginning. Listen to the bass and the keyboard. They're doubling that sound, so they're making an aggregate sound. Now that's Joe Sample, great jazz pianist on clavinet, and Victor Feldman is playing electric piano. Victor Feldman actually is playing on some Miles Davis. He was typically a vibes player, but he was also a good pianist. And then the great Larry Carlton on guitar, and Chuck Rainey, the great on bass. Tom Scott, incredible sax player, And I don't know who else was in the brass section. And I don't know who the female backup singers are. So, this is sort of like, I can take a look at how this piece of music was put together in terms of where things are in the stereo field and also pitched low to high, right? So I made this kind of really cool chart here, which took me a couple hours to make. Now, what I want you to do is a little bit different. Let me, so you're not going to be able to do the Radiohead song because I'm going to be showing you this now. Sorry. So this is what my former student did, right? Track begins with guitar feedback and messing with the pickup switch, which is panned into the right ear with some ambience bleeding to the left. At 12, drum machine comes in being played through both ears, right? So he's basically going through the piece. Are you such a dream? And at every time there's a change, he's putting down the time that it happens and saying what's actually going on. He's writing it out in words. I do not want you to write it's mezzo forte, it's staccato. Don't use music terms, right? Just use adjectives, okay? Just descriptive adjectives, guitar feedback, right? Drums being played through both ears, and then, so the guitar chord in the right ear, so you can just really go through it and put together a blueprint on time as things are unfolding to see what's happening. And the way that you would do that is like you would put it into iTunes or whatever your media player is. And if you notice, there is a time indicator right here. So, right, you could write that time down and then you write what's going on there. And then as the track is unfolding, so that goes on 12 at about 11, 12 seconds. And if you're off a couple of seconds where the things come in, don't worry about that. Just, get the general idea, So if that actually came in at about 10 seconds and he wrote 12 seconds, not a problem, right? That's fine. Don't worry about that. But note that something changes and try to hear what that is and try to describe what that change is in adjectives. All right? So right now, in the right, there's like broken arpeggios in the guitar. There's drums in the middle. And then there's something else happening in my left ear. And I'd have to listen again to see what that is. And you guys should be hearing this in stereo right now. There's some sort of weird sound in my left ear. At 26, lead vocal comes in, right? And right, so you could hear that there's two vocals. So if you want to write harmony, that's fine, that's okay. Or just two voices come, vocal and a second voice. Are you such a dreamer? Now, when you listen to that voice, you can clearly hear that there are two voices, right? Are they at the same volume? Listen one more time.
No.
Right, which one is louder? Let's play it back and tell me which one is louder. Are you such a dreamer to put the world? The melody is much louder than the backup vocal. The backup vocal almost sounds like a shadow. So I'd write like the background, the main vocal is prominent. The background vocal almost sounds like it's shadowing on a different pitch, something like that, right? It doesn't have to be, a Shankerian analysis or any technical thing like that. And notice it's still very sparse, right? Always makes a five. I'll let Okay, so that's the second verse. You would write. 53, second verse.
Down the tracks, sunburn high. January as April showers, and two always makes a fire. It's the devil.
Okay, so that's 122, right? Something happens there, right? So let's listen.
It's the devil's way.
So the drums get much quieter, but it fills out because there's a bunch of other instruments in there, and you got to hear where they're panned left and right and how they work with the voice, right? This is, Radiohead is such an interesting group because they are so great with textures, unusual chord progressions, and the guy's such an engaging listen. The vocalist, Tom York, I think his name is. And also, you hear the way that the guitars are playing. They're going dooga 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 dooga. That's much different accompaniment than
A dreamer.
right. They're playing a faster rhythm and they're higher pitched. So these are just notice and write these things down. So okay. So how do you do this? Well, you can use this as a template for what it should look like. So if you can't type, if you write it out on a piece of paper, make sure I can read it and then take a picture of it and then get it in your computer and rename it. But you should be able to type it out, and this shouldn't take you more than a couple of hours to do. But I don't want you to sit at this for 2 hours without a break and do it. What I want you to do is to break it up over time. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go through this music, and a lot of this music is old and you haven't heard a lot of this music. And I want you to pick a song. Right, so there's a couple of newer things, but there's Get Lucky, there's Uptown Funk. So there's a couple of newer things, but there's a lot of, there's Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, but there's a lot of stuff from the 60s and 70s. And, it's interesting, if you listen to this stuff, you can hear the way that the recordings have changed over time. Right. So, for example, we just heard that right there. We'll listen to the song Alone. Again, this is by a group called Love from their album Forever Changes, which was recorded like 1967. Well, the first thing is the recording is much softer. Next thing you notice, everything is in the middle. It's in mono. There's no panning. Right? And even though they had stereo back then, they mixed everything to mono because things were mostly played in cars, on car radios, or in little, like I had one when I was a little kid, a turntable with one speaker in it, But then if we listen to Sarah McLachlan, you hear how much louder that recording is? And then all of a sudden things are in stereo. It's muddy. So, and then like this Quincy Jones, which you recognize from the Austin Powers movies, there's a lot of reverb. If you listen to that trombone, bam, boom, bim, bam, bam. Excuse me. After the sound, you can hear that there's a lot of echo or reverb. Right, and that's panned in the left ear, the reverb. That's a characteristic of early stereo music, right? The reverb got panned to specific spots. And the reason why this is good is that you're going to be mixing music by the end of the semester. So I want you to start hearing and listening and starting to think about this stuff now. Right, and this is much louder. Right, very dry. Not a lot of reverb on that.
Don't believe me, just
You know, it's highly influenced by Prince. That highly influenced. Like I'm surprised that Prince's estate didn't sue him. But anyway, that's a great track. And then we can listen to this by Earth, Wind, and Fire. This is some of the best sounding. So Uptown Funk was recorded inside of a computer. September by Earth, Wind, and Fire was recorded in a 24-track studio, as was Black Cow. And this is like the best sounding stuff that was recorded on analog tape and not digitally. So how many guitars are playing now? Let me play that again. How many guitars are playing? Anybody want to venture a guess?
2.
Correct. There's a guitar that's going dit 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 dit, and then there's a guitar that's going diggy 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 diggy. Right. So let's listen to that again. All right. So now let's listen to that one more time. Listen to the guitar that's going. The guitar that's going dit 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 dit. That's in your left ear. Then listen to the piano that's in your right ear, and listen to the left hand of the piano, and hear how it works together with that funky guitar lick. These guys were unbelievably great. The piano goes bum 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 bum. Right, you can hear that towards the end of that phrase. So the guitar is over here that's going, the funky guitar, the strumming guitar is in the middle. Over here is the piano, and then also over here is the cowbell, bonk, bonk, playing quarter notes, right? Just playing that. And then if you can really hear, there's an electric piano sort of like where your eye, like at eye level, like right here in the left right field. It's just going bring, like little belly things very quietly. I don't know if you'll be able to hear that over Zoom. It's going beep boom, right? It's on 4 and 1 at the turnaround there. So at 11 seconds, finger snaps come in. So if you were to pick this song, you could write a roadmap of what's happening, and just do the best you can, and have it something that looks like this. Now, what I will do, and notice how Sam has labeled this, right? Radiohead, the date he did this last year, same date, 2021, and his initials SR. All right. So I will send you an email with where I want this to go, and I will put the naming format in there for you to have as a reference. Okay, so that's going to be your assignment due next week. Don't spend more than 2 hours. Pick a song. Listen to the song. Listen to the song. Like, get it in your phone. Listen to the song. If you could, listen to it 10, 15 times. Just get a nice overview of it. And then start, like when you're walking, when you're traveling somewhere. Some of you guys have in-person classes this semester. Is that correct? So when you're commuting, listen to the song. Get it in your ear. Pick one you like, that you find interesting. And then I know there's a lot of old music in there, but it's all good. And then once you're familiar with the song, then spend half an hour and go through the first minute, then leave it, then spend another half hour, go through the next bit, and then leave it, and then come back, review that. So spend maybe 2 hours over the next week, in 3 or 4 different sessions, and always review what you've done. This is the way, good work habit. If you're going to wait till next Tuesday night to do this, you're not going to get all the benefits out of this. right? What I'm trying to get you to do is multiple things with this assignment. I want you to start learning how to listen to music differently. And I want to get your work habits so that you are, there's a thing where you work on something and you leave it. You're not thinking about it anymore. Your mind's still working on it, right? And then when you come back to it, you have a fresh, rational mind, but the back part of your mind, your intuition, your subconscious has been working on it. And you'll hear things differently when you come back to it, and you might adjust stuff. So I find that that's really helpful. And unfortunately for me, when I'm working on film scores, I don't have a lot of time to do that because I have deadlines. I just have to get stuff out and get it the best it can be. But when I'm writing my own music, I certainly look at it as a big piece of clay on a wheel, and I sculpt it, and I go back and I fine tune and I spend time on it, and then I put it away, and then I come back to it. So it's better to spend if you're learning an instrument, right? It's better to practice 25 minutes a day, 6 days a week, than it is to practice 4 hours one day and then not touch your instrument for 2 weeks. Much better, much better. So I'm just sort of, introducing some concepts here that hopefully will make your everything else you do better too. So anyway, any questions on that? Let's see. I posted it in the chat, Anastasia, and I will email it out again additionally as well to everybody. Let's see. Nope. Hold on, I'll put it in the chat again. Very easy. Here we go. Yep. Ask questions. If it's been a minute and I haven't looked over there because I'm looking at the camera here or the screen, just open up your mic and say something. It's not a problem. I welcome questions. All right, everyone. So that's it for today. Okay. I think that's a lot of stuff. Now I'm going to probably, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a lot of copywritten material on this video. I may post it and send you the link for it off of YouTube. I don't want to get it blocked, but typically we won't be using so much copywritten material every week, and it will be up there. But let me think about that before I upload it. Or maybe I'll upload it and keep it unlisted for a day and see if they block anything. But you'll have this to review. You'll have this to review. So with that, get your Pro Tools straightened out this week. You only need to get the keyboard and Pro Tools installed. The recording kit, you don't have to work. If you get it and leave it in your homes, that's great. If you want to come back and get it in a month, that works too. I will give you ample notice before we start recording things. But yeah, just get your setup going. And this is an easy assignment. It'll get you a nice A probably to start the semester off. I'm not a hard ass marker, right? If I see people putting effort and they hand stuff in on time, and even if you don't get a great mark on the first couple of assignments, if I see progress and progression and you're getting it, that's much, much, much more important to me. All right. That's really important if I see improvement. So like I said, I'm not a hard marker as long as you hand stuff in on time, or let me know about it. Any questions before we go?
Yes, Professor. This is Andrew Holcomb.
Yes, Andrew.
I might have missed it. I might have missed. You said you're not a hard marker. Do you want it to basically just be a clean, readable, cohesive template for our music write-up, or should we follow any sort of formula like the example you gave us?
Well, I want a PDF. Okay, right? The naming convention is fine. If you have a different way of doing it, let me see it. But I need to see the time that something happens and what happens. You know what I mean? Like where in the song, at 40 seconds in, this happens. At 35 seconds in, the chorus comes in, and the first time through the chorus, it's this. At a minute 40, the second chorus comes in, and it's bigger because there's more voices. Whatever. I need to see the time stamp. I don't need to see measure numbers. I want you to get used to how things unfold temporally rather than music form for this particular assignment. All right, I'm just trying to develop different ways of listening to music.
Thank you, Professor. That cleared it up for me.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I will catch you next week. Have a great weekend and week. Enjoy it. Try not to get too cold. I'm in Florida right now, so it's 75 degrees today. I'll catch you soon.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Have a great day,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.